Great. Well, thanks very much to Esri for the opportunity to speak today about cumulative analysis of overlapping marine protections. It's a pleasure to be with you all. Over the past 6 years, my colleagues and I at ProtectedSeas, in partnership with NOAA's MPA Center and with generous software support from Esri's Conservation Grants Program, have been building a free open database called Navigator. Navigator offers not just a location, or not just a guide to the location of marine protected areas, but also a guide to the actual regulations designated for each area. Regulations and mapping data are sourced directly from management authorities, and the regulations are reviewed and summarized for inclusion in the database. As a guide to the regulatory seascape, Navigator not only helps fishers and boaters on the water stay aware of rules and regulations, but also helps inform the international ocean conservation community on the state and coverage of ocean protection, offering a baseline assessment to track progress towards marine protection goals. Navigator includes more than just MPAs. When resources and information are available, Navigator goes beyond country MPA designations to include a wider set of place-based restrictions that impact marine life, including other measures that protect habitat and ecosystems like fishery management areas, water quality, health, and safety areas. In the US, this has translated into over 4,500 marine managed areas in our data set. And to date, we have over 12,000 areas available in our global data set. In addition to regulatory summaries and references, we assign a level of fishing protection score to each area based on the analysis of its restrictions on marine life extraction, coded on a 5-level scale, where most restrictive prohibits all fishing and least restrictive has no additional fishing restrictions over general regulations. We also have activity-based restriction codings for over 20 fishing gear and other marine activities that we code as either allowed, restricted, prohibited, or unknown. Navigator's legal analysis considers each place-based measure individually, separate from any other overlapping measures under different authorities. The resulting activity codings for each site are therefore not cumulative, but only reflective of the regulation and management of that area. In the US's marine waters, there are up to 35 marine managed areas that overlap a single location, each with different restrictions and management objectives. This overlap can make overall assessment of marine protection quite challenging. Many US MPAs do not themselves regulate extractive uses, as these activities are often managed through other mechanisms by state fish and wildlife agencies and regional fishery management councils. As such, an individual area's protection status may not accurately reflect the true protections of a given ocean space, and thus the need to analyze the regulations from overlapping sites cumulatively to understand the full set of restrictions and provide a better resource for decision makers. Furthermore, the process of spatially joining the marine managed areas into cells of a tessellation can help make the data more visually discernible. For example, a common issue with displaying marine managed areas that border a coastline is the use of varying coastline resolutions in their boundaries, which leads to complex and distracting lines on the map. So we chose to aggregate our data set into 10 square kilometer hexagon grids. Hexagons were used because we felt they could better replicate, preserve the nonlinear nature of the marine managed area boundaries. And they are also visually appealing and do not suffer from linear stripe effects like in square tessellations. So our US grids contain over 1 million hex cells. The grid layers are available in our cumulative regulations viewer, which can be accessed in the ProtectedSeas ArcGIS online portal. And we have grid layers for the highest level of fishing protection score, cumulative overlap, which is how many sites intersect each grid cell, cumulative gear prohibitions, or how many fishing gear prohibitions each grid cell contains, and a maximum bottom trawling restrictions layer, just as an example of the highest restriction codings for a single fishing gear type. The hex grid layers are formatted as tile services for quick rendering on the web and linked to a feature service to access the underlying attributes in the pop-ups for each cell. Just released in our updated version of the viewer is the ability to not only see the highest level of protection score or highest gear and activity restrictions, but an expanded view of all sites that intersect each cell and their individual scores and codings to identify which marine managed areas were responsible for the highest restrictions. To access this information, simply zoom to a grid cell, click on it to open the pop-up, and follow the regulation summary info link to open the hex grid summary page. The hex grid summary page provides 3 regulation summary tables in addition to a static map of the cell location. The first table shows level of fishing protection scores with the highest score from all intersecting sites in the first row and individual scores for each intersecting site in the following rows. The second table shows restriction codings for each fishing gear type, and the third table shows restriction codings for each non-fishing activity. This helps illuminate the cumulative protections for a given ocean space while providing all the individual codings from the intersecting marine managed areas in an easy-to-read format. To provide a couple quick examples of how viewing the regulatory data cumulatively can more accurately determine protection status, on this slide, the Farallon Islands region is shown, which is a regulatory complex region with many overlapping sites. Many of these sites do not explicitly prohibit coastal fishing gears in their regulations. If you look in the table here, you can see many sites that are either just restricted or unknown with those codings. And yet the islands themselves are a national wildlife refuge that prohibit entry. So all coastal activities are prohibited, something that becomes immediately apparent when considering the regulations cumulatively. In a second example, 3 national marine sanctuaries in Central California are shown, each of which are assigned or were assigned low level of fishing protection scores because they have few to no restrictions on marine life extraction through their own management or legal authorities. However, when looking cumulatively at the range of management approaches in place across these ocean spaces, they are actually highly regulated areas, with much of the area having 4 or more fishing gear types prohibited year-round. These restrictions are tied to fishery management boundaries governed and enforced separately from the sanctuaries. So while the sanctuaries themselves do not manage or enforce fishing regulations, the areas are indeed managed for harmful fishing practices. So this perspective of looking at the regulations cumulatively suggests that ocean places like these, where MPAs and other place-based management areas overlap, may have greater conservation contributions than the individual site level fishing protection scores would suggest. And future work will consider calculating aggregate level of fishing protection scores instead of just at the individual area level. And also contribution of MPA versus non-MPA regulations to a given ocean spaces protections will also be explored. So thanks for your attention. And I've listed my email here as well as ProtectedSeas website and the ArcGIS Online portal website, and I'll add them to the chat as well. And I look forward to answering your questions in the Q&A section after. Thanks.